Welcome to Cognitive Vigilance Podcast. I am here with Alexander from Date Psych, Rin, and Kyle Matovic. I'm actually really excited about this. I discovered Alex from Twitter because he kind of got into some debates, I guess we'll say, with some red pill people. And I think I actually think I must have agreed with a few things that you said, because that's why I initially followed you, because I was like, based. Can you give a little bit of like background of yourself and what you do and all that fun stuff?
Sure. So my name is Alexander. Previously, I did a master's degree in research in behavior and cognition, another master's degree in behavior and cognitive neuroscience. Now I'm in a PhD program for clinical psychology. And I focus a lot on research on dating, on attractiveness, a lot of personality psychology, evolutionary psychology, psychology of relationships, dating, and that sort of a thing. Kind of run a lot of surveys, conduct some original research, YouTube as well, kind of deep dives into the research on different topics, and that's kind of my thing there.
Awesome. So what's like your main focus is dating. So currently, do you have like particular topics that you're kind of like focused on?
So my main interest originally was faces, so research on facial attractiveness. But yeah, there's so much crossover, all kind of related to dating, attractiveness, relationships. At the moment, I'm working on something related to mate value and age. So kind of the question, what is the peak age for mate value, and how does age discrepancy kind of play into mate value, right? Because we know that there's kind of very strong age preferences in mate selection. So, there's some debate like, is the man at his highest peak mate value at 35? It's kind of tricky because if women are at their highest peak at 20 or something like that, most 20-year-old women don't want to date an older man. So there's kind of some paradoxes there, some questions kind of to iron out.
I see this all the time, this discourse. And I personally don't. I when I was 19, I dated a 30-year-old. And I remember thinking he was like ancient. Like I remember thinking he was so old and feeling like it was really weird that he wanted to date me. And but he would like take me on the best dates. And it was I was like, okay, well, we're gonna do all this fun stuff. Like he got me into bars when I was like 19. So I thought that was cool. And but still felt really uncomfortable. I never slept with him. I think I was 20. I wasn't 19. I was 20. I'll give it a year.
That's better. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I was 20.
That 1 year makes a difference.
I think I was 20.
You what? You weren't a teenager any longer, to be fair, too.
Yeah, but I actually ended up started to date my college boyfriend, who ended up becoming a long-term boyfriend. I ended up starting to date him, and the guy got so mad that he was like, "Oh, you're gonna date this like college loser," and I was like, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, personally, I felt that way when I was younger, that I wasn't very attracted to people that much older than me. And so but that's obviously anecdotal in my personal experience, but I do feel like typically you're more attracted to people within your own age group, though I would say like within 10 years probably isn't that big of a difference. So what's like the data that you've kind of come up with that?
Sure. So I recently ran a survey on this just a few days ago and posted up.
I filled that survey out.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So the average ideal age gap for women was 1.9 years in that, if I remember correctly. I did a similar survey about a year ago, and pretty similar as well, that, women show a really, really strong preference for men close to their own age at all age levels. If you look at a scatter plot of the correlation, you get Pearson's correlations of about, 0.9. So it's almost a perfect correlation with what age women are and what age they say they want in a romantic partner. For men, it's a little bit different. For men, men tend to prefer women in their 20s, and it stays in the 20s until they get pretty old, into their 50s or 60s, and then they start to say, yeah, I want someone in my 30s. But the age gap is pretty big there that men seem to prefer. But women really, really prefer men who are close to their own age. That's data that's been replicated across many countries from the research of David Buss, evolutionary psychologist. And in that OkCupid data set that's really famous that goes around, you see the exact same thing there.
Yeah.
Do you think any aspects of that are like time relevant? Like where we've been gathering a lot of data the last decade plus, but if we look at it kind of anecdotally, it feels like it might have been a little bit more favored to see like an age gap in like years past or something. I don't know if there's any data to back that up. I'm just going off of like kind of.
Sure. So I've actually posted some threads on this, big deep dives into the historical literature. And I think there's a very popular perception that very, very large age gaps used to be common, especially during the late modern period, the Middle Ages and that sort of thing, but they really, really weren't. Men and women tended to get married kind of late and with a small age gap, the average about 4 to 5 years, pretty much across the last 1,500 years of European history. In more recent history, for example, the study by David Buss, I think that was done in the late 80s. And yeah, even across 37 different cultures, the average age preference was about 3 years, and the average age for being married was also about 3 years. So stated preferences and revealed preferences, very similar on that as well. So it seems pretty consistent across time and across cultures that people like small age gaps. And now you can always find exceptions to that, of course. And,
Yeah.
you know, but that's kind of the general thing going on.
I would say that I think environment might have something to do with that too. Like the infamous daddy issues, you know, like I would say that that might have something to do with certain women liking older men and like that being a thing. Also, the other thing is like some women will date older men because they know that it's more about wealth acquisition and security, but that doesn't mean that they're physically attracted to you. Like,
Right.
which
I
I
mean,
think if you're okay with that, if you're like okay with a woman dating you, not because she thinks you're hot, but because she wants to take your money, like, cool. Just like make sure you're like mentally aware of that, because I guess that might be because that's the sexual market value trade-off, right? Is that like it's like you're trading wealth for beauty?
well, and Alex, you could correct me where I'm wrong here if you feel necessary, but like women, obviously there's objective attraction cues for both men and women, like, but men we're much more, you know, attuned to like what we visually see. We're much more visually stimulated, whereas like women are going to look for a little bit more affluence in guys, and there's still like objective attraction cues. So like we know, like I think it was David Buss who in Evolution of Desire, I'm listening to that book right now, where he said that like the ideal hip to waist ratio for men, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but obviously you want a wider, or not hip to waist, but shoulder to waist ratio in men. That's going to be more objectively attractive to women. But like regardless, your affluence would probably weigh a little bit heavier in her decision as to whether or not to settle with you as a long-term mate. Does that sound right to you?
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, there's some question, do men or do women care about, you know, physical attractiveness more? Both seem to prioritize it highly, but I think the big sex difference is women prioritize a lot of other traits. They're really important to women as well. So personality traits, behavior, the things that women will say they want in a mate right off the bat, like discipline or commitment, loyalty, kindness, and then also things like resource provisioning ability, status signals as well. David Buss had a really good cross-cultural study on status cues as well. And those are all things that men view as leadership traits in other men and that women view as attractive in men. So higher levels of education, income, all sorts of things like that, basically.
Did you see anything in regards to men not being attracted to women for any other like status symbol, or like if they have because I feel like I've seen this occasionally, but I don't know if this is the norm. I have seen some men actually like women that are successful because they like what comes along with that. But is there anything there, or is it like no, mostly across the board, most men don't care?
There's a little bit there. And one of the things, there was a couple of papers on dating apps that found, okay, so women that indicate a higher level of education on dating apps, they might actually get fewer matches. So there can be signals like that that perhaps some men are intimidated by, that they don't like. But there's another issue there as well, in that women, even, you know, very successful women, they still tend to prefer men who are, you know, on average a little bit more successful, a little bit higher in status. So what can happen is when women become very successful, say they have a PhD and a very high income, they might have a much harder time finding a man who ticks all the boxes in that sense, right? Being able to kind of select someone who's a little bit higher in status.
He may not be economically attractive.
Yeah, because they're so high in status already that their pool is much smaller. Something that you mentioned, Kyle, a second ago as well, I think it's called the beauty status exchange. To what extent do people exchange, you know, women essentially exchange their youth, their beauty in a relationship for status or income? There's a lot of research on that. It seems to be pretty small and infrequent. There isn't a lot of trade-off. We tend to select partners who are close in socioeconomic status and close in physical attractiveness. So assortative mating kind of across the board there. Yeah, we end up with partners who about as attractive as we are, similar status as we
You're
are.
saying Kanye isn't going to go pick up a cashier at Burger King? I thought that that's like that's the meme, right? Like any rich guy would just, if she was hot enough, they would date a cashier.
Well,
The hottest
funny, I'm
cashier.
pretty
I've
sure.
never seen that happen though. Like, has that ever happened where like this famous celebrity like went to a gas station and like picked up the cashier to like date long term? Maybe
Well,
like they might have fucked him, but like
Does
has that-
this data factor in hookups, or is it like talking about like pair bonding? Like
Oh
dating?
yeah.
I think that would just be pair bonding. That would be looking at long-term relationship pairs. I don't know of
Okay.
any that looks at just hookups for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean hookups, it's like I feel like
Well,
Throws
okay,
all your
so-
numbers off the.
Well, didn't David Buss also do a study where he said that basically, like, men, regardless of like the occupation that women did, they didn't really dispute the woman's attractiveness, whereas, like, you know, when men were assessed upon their occupation, women graded or interpreted their attractiveness like severely different depending on their occupation.
Yeah, exactly. Men don't seem to assess occupation a lot. I think there still are reasons that men should, even if they don't do it as much. And one of those is that women with higher levels of education, much less likely to be divorced. Education level it's pretty much a really good filter for like selecting a mate. So it's perhaps something people should think about and maybe pay attention to a little bit more. But yeah, at the end of the day, for men, it's just kind of like physical attractiveness. A lot of the other things kind of come second. And there's, aside from the research of David Buss, which looks kind of at these preferences, a lot of stated preferences, there's a lot of research using speed date methodology. So they bring strangers in, go in a circle, you know, you're talking for 5 minutes to this person, that person, and the next. And when you look at these things like income, they don't seem to matter at all. Pretty much the only thing that matters at that kind of zero contact is physical attractiveness, very high for men and women. Behavior does as well, some personality, kind of the things that you can glean in that interaction can in some of these, but it's pretty much like, how do they look? Yeah.
But so you're talking about initial attraction. Do you think that like those secondary factors come into play in like the first month, third month sort of thing, where it's like, oh, you know, I like this person, we're having a lot of fun, but now I need to start thinking about what this looks like after the initial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing is attractiveness seems to function kind of like a gate where, you know,
Right.
someone has, you know, they have it kind of in these pill spaces. They call it the looks test. And that's pretty accurate, I think. You have to pass the looks test. But once someone passes that looks test, everything else comes into play. You know, the ick. It's easy to give women the ick. You pass the test. Oh, well, something happened. You know, it's easy to become contemptuous of people. There was a really interesting study by Paul Eastwick and Samantha Joel. They're also on Twitter. You should follow them. And they looked at a bunch of different traits, physical and behavioral. Which ones predicted who was still together after 9 months? Very well done study. None of them did. So we still really don't know, like, the puzzle, like how do we know who's going to make it and who's not? But we do know that, you know, some behavioral traits really robustly associated with like divorce, breaking up, that sort of thing, and others are not. And, you know, you can look at status things as well, like people with PhDs, much less likely to get divorced. People that have no education at all, much more likely to get divorced. That sort of thing. So those matter, but for that kind of initial attraction, yeah, it's kind of a looks test.
Do you think it might be associated to like just because maybe people that are less likely to get an education, maybe there's maybe it's just that there's more of them because I could be wrong here, but is it that there's like more people that are less likely to get an education, which is why they are seem to be more likely to get divorced because there's more of them, or is it more like a per capita type of thing? I don't know.
Yeah, that's more of a per capita type thing there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay. And then I would just wonder if like that has something to do with the fact that like because what would be the other traits you would assume of someone that is less that doesn't have an education? And is that just like any education at all?
Yeah, it seems to be kind of linear. It scales with the level of education. So, for example, someone with a bachelor's degree, a little bit less, and this is true for both men and women, and it's actually a very similar effect. Men and women with a bachelor's degree, less likely to get divorced. Master's degree, even less likely. PhD, even less likely. And I think professional degrees are similar. So, medical school degree or a law degree, that sort of a thing as well.
So I'd be super curious if that tracks, like if you had enough data set of outliers of people with low education and high income, if you would then see a lower rate. Like, is it basically because that education, like, you know, like that curve tends to also correlate to income, right? So you have higher levels of education also correlates to higher levels of income. Is that like, as you go up in income brackets, you become less likely to take divorce? And if you have, you know, the people who are running really successful like landscaping businesses, like never graduated high school but have a really like wonderful financial empire going on, or anything of that nature. I'm because that's super curious to me that education would be such an indicator, and I'm wondering if it's like correlative or kind of like showcasing something else.
I think so. I think you're correct. Income's a part of it, and I think low income is essentially. We can't say this for sure, but this is what I think. It's probably causal of divorce. And so why do I say that? Because many people cite financial problems as a reason for divorce. So already, if you're in a really tight financial situation, you're having money problems, you fight over it, that's going to stress the relationship. So income's a part of it. But I think also probably what education level is kind of screening for is personality traits and things like that. So someone who can make it through the education without dropping out and all of that, they might have a kind of different personality profile. For women, they might be a little bit higher in agreeableness. Men and women both probably higher in conscientiousness. They're probably better at long-term planning. So you're going to have people who are slightly more intelligent on average as well. And these are all things, that are inversely associated with divorce. So education, it's probably not like you can go to school and it's going to make you, reduce your risk, but it's kind of a filter for that. It's probably the people that do make it have a lot of traits, that are beneficial in relationships.
So what do you think about, you had mentioned income being causal in divorce, particularly amongst lower income people. Do you think there's also an element of women feeling like they're not, like, I hate to go to the platitude already, but like hypergamy. So like women feel like they have better options out there. So therefore they feel like it's a better idea to divorce and see what's out there rather than kind of stick around and see, like, basically maybe they thought that like, hey, I bet on a bad horse, so I should get rid of this one and see if I can find another one.
Sure. So that's a good point that I was thinking that you just reminded me. So there is some indication that when education goes up for married women, their probability of getting divorced also goes up. So not education, I should say income. When income goes up, women are also more likely to divorce. And so why is that? Well, one reason could be, because they now see their own value as perhaps higher than the mate they're with. And there's something called interdependence theory that kind of explains why do some relationships stay together? Why do some break up? And it's kind of like, okay, how is your value as a mate relative to the other mate? If the other person has a big decline in value or you have a big increase, maybe you will be less happy with them. So we do know that women prefer men who make more money on average is a stated preference. And they also tend to select men as an expressed preference that make more than they do on average. So if women start making a lot of money relative to the man, maybe they're going to be less happy with that. Alternately, if they were not fulfilled in the relationship to begin with, and now they are making more money, and now they say the exit for me is going to be easier at this point, that can also facilitate it. And the two aren't contradictory. The two can both be at play at the same time to kind of help to explain that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is interesting. I hate this concept of like sexual market value, even though I know that it is. I understand the term. I hate that we use like these economic terms in regards to relationships. Like, how did this start? Is this the red pill's fault? Whose fault is this? How did this happen? Has this always been a thing? Can someone explain this to me? No.
I feel like it's been around longer than red pill for sure.
Yeah, probably.
It's been around longer than red pill. The idea of mate value, I mean, I'm reading some papers on this now. Some of these papers go back to the 70s. So there's always been an idea that, some mates are more valuable than others, that there's different traits that make a person more desirable or have higher value as a mate, that, relationship between age. And I mean, you can see this in animals as well. It's used to describe animal mating and all of that, especially in some animals where you'll see only a very small percentage of males mate. I think there are some birds where, like 2 out of 150 will actually mate. And they'll be like, okay, so these are the high value birds or whatever. But
I'm too much of a romantic, for better or worse. So one thing that I've seen you talk a lot about is like incel culture. Is it a culture? I don't know. I would love to kind of get so did you do some research into that as well? Oh,
no, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just I have obviously seen a lot of this on Twitter in regards to people that are like angry at women. So they'll also, actually, in regards to this mate value thing, they'll kind of make these really high standards of like, oh, I would never date a woman like that. Oh, but it's like, bro, have you ever touched a woman? Like, what's up with these like ridiculous standards when was the last time you were in a room with a woman, sir? Like, so I know that you kind of have done some stuff there. If you could give me some information on that.
Sure. Yeah, I've ran a couple of surveys on incels and written a little bit about the research. The real expert on incels, of course, is William Costello, Andrew Thomas. They're on Twitter also. They would be someone interesting to talk to. But yeah, I've done a little bit of surveys with incels and kind of looked at that. So I think one of the papers that William did actually looked at kind of their mate preferences and asked, I think it was William, I hope he's going to see this and tell me if I'm wrong or not, but asked if they did essentially have higher standards or not. And actually their kind of expressed preferences were really similar to the non-incel group. So it might not be that they had higher standards, at least in that data. Sometimes you can certainly get that perception with the way that they
Yeah,
act
I
in
actually think
communities.
it's fake. It's fake. Like it's not real. Like I think that they just say this stuff because they're like it's like an internet persona. It's like a keyboard warrior. But I actually don't think that any of these, like if they were in a room with a girl, I actually think that these ideas that they have are not true. Like I've seen this like IRL. I'm a libertarian. There's plenty of celibate people there. And like the people that are probably the most like vocal about women are the ones that like turn into a puddle when you're in a room with them, you know? So like I don't know. I feel like they're not actually that picky. It's just that they like to like make it
They have bad
perceived
social
that way.
skills.
Yeah, like they are trying to
Well,
like
okay, but I mean, this also, my understanding is that like around the mid 2000s, because of a lot of social media apps, people tended to stop interacting with people as much. So I don't know if that tracks with autism or anything like that, but like, you know, you're not used to going up and interacting with people a lot more. So therefore, you know, when it comes, especially to the opposite sex, because like I think we all know that like if you're a guy, typically you're going to go into jobs where there's mostly guys for the most part. Now, obviously, there's a little bit more nuance here, but speaking granularly, or you know, in a pretty like 50,000 foot view, you're probably interacting with mostly guys. So when you see women, if you don't interact with women frequently, then it may be a little bit mysterious to you because you don't understand the social dynamics at play there at all times.
yeah. And maybe that's kind of what I think what the red pill is for, if I'm right, Kyle.
To a degree, like there's definitely some of
For
that in
those
there. It
people?
was, yeah, it was funny. I was on a show once, and they, one of the people asked, "Well, where's the part of the red pill that teaches people to be sociable?" I'm like, "Well, if you look for the right people, there are people who promote, you know, more pro-social behaviors because like you can't be good with women if you don't interact with women. Like part of that is just going to be not necessarily like straight up PUA stuff, but hey, you know, just be like a charming person, be sociable, be enjoyable to be around, not just for women but also for men. And then you're probably already, you know, you get your foot in the door by just being a remotely, you know, enjoyable person to be around versus being an incel who cries because your dick hurts and you're not getting laid."
So
also-
I mean, so,
Well,
go ahead,
sorry.
Brandy.
I was just I was just gonna say I did see Alexander say that you that there isn't as many people not having sex as it would appear, right? Am I incorrect? I think I did see you post some stuff about that there's like this idea that there's like this like large group of men that like aren't having a lot of sex, but it's actually a lot smaller than reality, and that's like they're just loud because they're on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the percentage of men who haven't been sexually active in the past year in the general social survey, the most recent data set, was about 10% of men, 10% of women. In the years before, it was a little bit higher, but also about the same for men and women. And then it kind of drops back down to that. But that's been pretty consistent, you know. Throughout the year, there's not a lot of people going without sex. And then if you look at actual virgins, men who have never had sex, by about age 25, you're looking at about 3 to 5% of men. So it's just not a very common thing that people
And is
remain.
that more now, or has it always kind of historically been consistent?
Oh, that's always been the case.
Yeah,
I
thought
suspect
so.
I suspect that has been the case for hundreds of years. I think people tend to think about a past like everyone got a mate or something. I think there was probably always a small portion of men who never made it, and we can kind of see that in genealogy records and kind of the genetic record that, you know. Historically, you know, there have been periods in thousands of years ago where only a small percentage of men reproduced. But for about the past 2,000 years, about 80% of men have reproduced. So there's always been, you know, kind of a fairly large chunk, but a large minority of men who have not reproduced for whatever the case may be.
What was the
Some
percentage?
probably excluded.
Again,
About
what was-
20% over the last 1,000 to 1,500 years or so of men that have not reproduced.
Yeah, I feel like
That
that makes sense to me. But what's weird is so like I know in the United States there's more women than men, but in worldwide there's more men than women, right? Yeah, I think that's the case. It's like so that does make sense. But in the United States there's more women than men.
by a very small amount, but it does make a
A
statistical
little bit
difference.
of a difference. I don't
Yeah.
know.
So
Yeah.
I was going to jump in and because some of the people I've again, this is all anecdotal, so I apologize to not have high powered numbers behind it. But a lot of the young men I talk to have had sex, but it's I don't want to say unsatisfactory, but they report it being like very confusing. Right, the dating scene itself is confusing, even though they're like, I can go get drunk at a party and hook up with somebody, but I don't know how to date. And the dating is this very confusing, nebulous place. And so, like, the people who are like struggling to date are still kind of like social in various ways, but are getting, I think, a lot of like very conflicting signals. Right, you have the almost like kind of like traditional gendered like advice from like the red pill and that kind of like the manosphere. You have a lot of like hyper, like don't do anything to offend women for fear of like cancellation or any of these things. And then there's a whole kinds of like, if you're learning your advice from the internet, it's terrifying and confusing. If you're learning it from like, the previous generation, none of it, you're like, you don't have any fucking clue what you're talking about. It's not what the dating world looks like now. And, so it's really interesting to try to find, like, I don't want to say universal truths, but very like long reaching, broad reaching truths for advice of all kinds of different backgrounds and situations. Do you have any sort of advice for young men today who are trying to date successfully and kind of wade through that confusion?
Yeah, that's a good point that you made, that just like had sex is probably not a great metric for like who's doing well in the dating environment. Yeah, and I did a meta-analysis on like physical attractiveness, lifetime sexual partners. The relationship is like very small, so it's just
can you elaborate on that statistic?
Sure. Yeah, it was about 0.14, the Hedges G across all of the different studies that looked at physical attractiveness and lifetime number of sexual partners. So there's very small relationship. It is a positive relationship, significant, but very small between physical attractiveness and having more sexual partners. So yeah, there's something going on there. People can probably be attractive and not do that well. People can be attractive and just get into a monogamous relationship, not have very many partners. People don't have to be super attractive if they're trying hard and they're trying to run through a bunch of people either. So there's kind of a bunch of stuff going on. Yeah. So you just don't see a large relationship with physical attractiveness and a lot of sexual partners. And so that's probably, I think people focus a lot on that. Like, how many
is that
people
for
have
men?
sex?
Well, obviously that would be for men and women.
That's just, that's for men. For women, and I didn't do a meta-analysis for women, I just looked at men, but I know kind of what the research says for women. Women who are more physically attractive on average tend to have fewer sexual partners. Yeah. Women who are less physically attractive, also fewer sexual partners. Women kind of in the middle, more. So there's kind of a curve there. And that's probably because,
the mids are fucked.
No, you're saying mids are doing all the fucking.
Yeah.
They're fucked. Okay.
Yeah. So mids are a little bit more promiscuous, maybe because they engage in sex earlier to get commitment, right? And very unattractive women kind of excluded entirely. More attractive women probably can be a little bit more selective. They don't need to give sex initially. Or, they're able to retain a mate longer. Could also be the thing, right? They get in the relationship with who they want and the relationship stays together longer.
Ooh, while we have you here, we have an ongoing dialogue. Do you have data on number of sexual partners in correlation to divorce rates?
Yeah, so I need to look into that a little bit more. It's interesting that people only ever talk about this for women because it's similar for men and women.
They do indeed,
yeah.
Right?
Typically, there is a positive association with more sexual partners and divorce. And this tends to kind of flatten out past, 2 or 3 partners, if I remember correctly. Thinking of kind of the charts from the Institute of Family Studies. They had one up from the GSS. I'm not sure why no one has ever gotten around to making one for men. I think I'll do that because I have the same data at some point. But I know that it's a similar relationship. And because more promiscuous individuals, again, this, some people have talked about like pair bonding and all of that. It's probably not a causal relationship. Probably what happens is, more promiscuous individuals on average, they're more likely to cheat. They're more likely to use drugs. They're more likely to have, I guess, undesirable personality profiles, personality disorders, higher in the dark triad. There's a whole bunch of things like that it's probably not a causal effect, like having sex with a bunch of people does it. But yeah, if someone has, a bunch of sexual partners, perhaps it's a little bit of a red flag there. And it is associated with higher risk of, infidelity, divorce, and all of that.
Yeah, so like when it comes to the body count discourse, I think the way that I think about this is that like if a woman has a lot of partners and there's probably other things about her that are going to jump out at you before you find out, like, you guys finish up and you're laying in bed and you say, all right, well, what number was I? Like there were probably some things earlier on that would probably given it away at some point. Now, when it comes to guys, my understanding is that basically like, so for women, it's like if you marry a virgin, your likelihood of divorce is pretty low. Now like 2 through 4, it raises a little bit, but then after 4, it goes down, and then after 10, it continues to go up. And once again, it's been a while since I looked at this. I was looking at, I think it was the GSS one, a while back, but once again, I'm pretty rusty
Is this
on this.
okay? As a bisexual, I'm just wondering this question real quick. Is this only men? Like, how many men you've had sex with, or do you think it? Like, are people? Do you count the girls too? Like, I'm genuinely wondering this on this particular thing. Like,
Yeah, I don't think anybody runs out and says, how many carpet munchers can we
no,
roll
like
together
what?
and see
Well,
if we
no,
can get
because
data on
I
it.
I
I'm
have
kidding, I'm
two
kidding, I'm
numbers.
kidding.
No, because
Sorry.
I have two
Yeah.
numbers. I have like the one, like I have the guys, but then I
Mm.
have like the combined of guys and girls, and like just the girl
Yeah.
number. So like it's like, when you would, what would the girls like? Does the girls count with this apparent body count?
I think it would in the GSS, if I remember the
You
question.
would?
Yes, I think it might in the GSS.
Okay.
I think
It's
it does.
it's a self-report of what you like. It's because some people will put that number. It really depends on how you count it, right? When you
Yeah,
ask, it's
I think they asked like how many sexual partners have you had? Count like penis and vaginal oral sex and all of that. And I don't know. So I think maybe
Oh.
it would count that. But I'm not
Okay.
sure. I'm not 100%.
Okay, yeah. Okay, just wondering. So
as oh, go ahead, Brandy. Sorry.
what were you gonna say, Ren?
I was just going to make a quip about being, representative team high number and what that looks
Well,
like.
Rin thinks I have a low number, but that's the thing. It's
You
so
do.
subjective. No, but other
Well,
people
but okay,
say that
hold
I
on,
have a
hold on.
high
But like
number.
for most people, and I know there's newer data on this, but like my understanding is that like basically in the general population, I think men's average body count is it's like 7 or 8, if I recall correctly, and then for women, it's like 5 or 6. I might be high on that. It, once again, been a little bit since I looked at this stuff. So like I would say generally, if you're over 10 for men or women, then like once again, we're speaking about average people. The average person is going to look at that and say, wow, if you have more than 10, that's probably high. Once again, talking about the average person.
I do just think it's like, well, that's always the name of the game on the show, right? Is like nuance. And I think there's a world, like a subset of people who live where, 20 is a low number and they have a whole kind of different like set of rules. Like it depends if you're doing it healthily or not, right? Because you talked about a lot of those, the qualities that come with, I think we know those stereotypical people who are kind of broken, filling voids, like doing a lot of things. But you also like, so I'm poly, non-monogamous. I live in a world where people are sex positive and kind of celebrating sex without, the kind of classical like monogamous pair bonding and like, those kinds of attributes. So it skews all the numbers. And you can have different subcultures that like a high number is probably less indicative of, the kind of classic things across the board. But it's hard to like work. It's really hard to work those into traditional dating analysis paradigms because now you almost have like different goals. You have different, like, it's like, you're not looking at the same relationship type. And I'd be super curious if your data gets confounded by that. Do you exclude like, like, oh, these, fucking swingers are going to throw my numbers off.
Yeah, I think it's something like the GSS. It might not kind of account for that. Whenever I run surveys myself and look at things like that, I get a very small non-monogamous group. And I usually don't exclude it because it's so small. But yeah, probably, if you were to account for that, typically when people do research on non-monogamous individuals, they have to kind of seek them out because it's kind of hard. You got to look for them and then kind of study them as a unique population. But yeah, and in a sense, I guess it depends also like what is your research question? What do you want to test? Like, is promiscuity worse for like the relationship outcomes of non-monogamous people or monogamous? I don't know. I don't think that's ever been done. I don't think we really know if it would have the same effect on like non-monogamous people and monogamous people.
There
Kind of an
needs to be
interesting
more
thing, though.
studies for non-monogamous and polyamory groups.
I mean,
like, I know it's a small group, so it's like, how do we get those
Yeah.
studies? Ella kind of works on this stuff. You know, Ella, yeah, she like does some stuff in that realm.
I mean,
Um,
I'm sure Alex knows that like finding funding for studies is very, very difficult.
yeah.
And I only know this because I've talked to so many researchers just in the nutrition world, and like to find, you know, okay, so we're gonna have to probably find people who support poly or who are poly that are going to put forth, you know, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars to, you know, research all this stuff to, you know, find out more about poly relationships.
not the most forthright crowd either. Like, you know, there's a lot of
Sure.
I've spoken to a couple of reporters from some big, you know, like news gathering information, like, and it's really the reporters I have spoken to have reported that like it's hard for like that, like there's people they know would be really great candidates to talk about and like really get interesting, like, you know, inside the community stories, and they don't want to talk because outside of 2 towns in the country there aren't really a lot of legal protections, and like there's a whole like you can lose your job and things like that, so they tend to be very insular within those communities. And it's a shame because I think there's a lot of nerds within the non-monogamous community who would value the data, but
It's
then
all nerds. What do you mean?
I was not trying to throw everyone under the bus, but yeah, there's a lot of so you have a lot of people who would value the data, but they themselves don't want to be the people who are being, you know, the representatives of that data, or
But
don't want
wouldn't
to
the data be private? So it's not like they would be outed.
But it's not the only way. Like, so like visibility is what gets you those studies coming your way, right? Like I remember a couple of producers came through trying to do like shows, like reality TV shows for like non-monogamous dating, and you know the conversation started out great, and then once it's like, oh no, that sounds terrible, like, and then all like once a few members of the community were like, no, this is no good, everyone just disappears, and it's like they have to go to a different town.
We need an autism and polyamory like test too, because I think it's like it's going to be very similar to like the autism libertarian thing, in my opinion.
I think Ayla might actually have data on autism and polyamory.
Does she?
I
Really?
think she might. I wouldn't be surprised because she would probably have the largest data sets that exist right now on polyamorous people is what I would imagine. And she asks so many different questions. Go on, ask her when you get back on Twitter. I bet she does.
I actually just I reached out to her to potentially have her on. She sent me an email to make that happen because I would love to talk to her. Because and the reason why I would think there's a connection potentially between polyamory and autism or non-monogamy is because of the lack of jealousy. Because like I feel that way. Like I don't feel jealous ever, and I don't think that that's normal because it seems like most people do feel that feeling. And I wonder if there's a connection between like being autistic or like being just like even a little bit on the spectrum and like not having that like immediate emotion that most people feel.
Well, we ran a survey on, and that was the only one where we really asked about polyamorous people, and it was about jealousy. We have the article up on the website. And yeah, we found the same thing. Yeah, they scored much lower in jealousy. We had a bunch of kind of novel jealousy items. Yeah, polyamorous people much lower in that. Polyamorous people were also more likely to be securely attached and not have anxious attachment. So anxious attachment is another thing that is associated with jealousy, of course. So yeah, there's those things there. I would imagine you would have to not feel very much jealousy. As a person who is a little bit more jealous myself, I couldn't do it. And I would think, you would have to feel very low jealousy to be
there are people in the community who struggle with jealousy, and I think it's not like there's a lot of good communicators, and so they can tend to like navigate those feelings. I think the bigger problem is that they often feel just like out of like there's so many people who don't feel jealousy. They're like, why am I the one, you know? But yeah, no, there's plenty of poly people who feel jealousy and they're just
I'm just saying like the norm, right? They wouldn't like for the majority probably wouldn't.
I would think more experienced jealousy than you might expect like on paper, but we always preach like each emotion you experience is like a muscle you flex. And so, you know, if you experience jealousy and you practice like, oh, what does this mean? How do I use this emotion positively and things like that? They tend to just be a lot easier at, you know, like, oh, like, let me talk myself down. Like this person didn't do anything wrong. I trust them, you know, and moving through it, as opposed to like I don't want to say the classic monogamous like way of you made me feel jealous, you need to change your behavior. Poly kind of like wisdom is if you feel jealousy, it's your emotion, you take ownership of it. And
Yeah,
you need to
accountability.
figure. Yeah, exactly.
Which is
Okay,
my
so-
vibe.
So maybe this can get. I could direct this a little bit more to the general public.
Yeah, let's do that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. But how did men and women, when you've researched it, interpret jealousy? Like my understanding is that men are always going to be innately jealous because once again, our instinct is to put on our seed to the next generation. So therefore, it is always in our interest to make sure that our mate essentially isn't cocking us, right? Like we're the only person that's going in and out of there, so to speak. Whereas like women may have some jealousy instinct, but I'm sure it's not as strong as men's. Is that reflected in the work that you've seen, in the work that you've done?
So a very consistent result across evolutionary psychology is that men experience more sexual jealousy and women experience more emotional jealousy. So
Sure.
this is often the research design for things like this will be like, you'll have a vignette or something, and it'll be like one vignette is like describing a situation where there's sexual infidelity, the other describing emotional infidelity. You ask men and women something like, pick which of these is worse. More women on average are going to pick the emotional one. More men on average are going to pick the sexual one. Now, I have seen people kind of question the extent to this. There's a good psychologist name is Adam Bode. He's a researcher of love, romantic love. He was having a discussion about this the other day on Twitter with us, and he was kind of saying, yeah, maybe that's not always the case. But I think when people see that, they often tend to think that means that men don't care about emotional or that women don't care about physical. If you have these vignettes and you have people rate them on a Likert scale or something like that, and it's like extreme infidelity or whatever, then both are going to rate them like really high. It's like, I don't like it, right? And there might be a difference on average, but there's that. So in our survey on jealousy, we came up with a bunch of questions that were really kind of ambiguous. For example, was like, you see your partner salsa dancing with someone else. How jealous does that make you? Across almost all of these kind of more ambiguous ones, right? Like someone is talking to your girlfriend or boyfriend at the gym. Men and women responded very, very similar to these. Now, I said they're ambiguous because they weren't clearly emotional or physical jealousy.
Sure.
They are things that can make some people jealous and some people won't be jealous. And yeah, there were very few sex differences across all of those. So it's, aside from the emotional versus physical sex difference, which is pretty well replicated, I don't know how clear it is that all of these other kinds of situations that people experience show a really, really strong sex difference. And maybe that makes sense because, the emotion of jealousy probably evolved to facilitate pair bonding, mate guarding, and that kind of thing. You don't want your mate to escape. You don't want them to be stolen away. Kyle, for men, as you said as well, parental certainty, right? You don't want to be cucked or whatever. You don't want to end up raising the offspring of another man. So there's all of these different things that would have kind of shaped the evolution of jealousy. But, there's good reasons for men and women both to want to retain a mate.
Yeah.
Do we have data on a gender bias for emotional cheating versus sexual cheating or physical cheating? So like yeah, go ahead.
That's something we're going to work on in a little bit here, actually. But yeah, I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure.
Like if one gender values like emotional, intimacy versus sexual intimacy, or jealousy is driven by emotional jealousy versus physical sexual jealousy, would you like guess that there might also be a difference in like the gender, like that maybe men are more likely to
Sexually cheat?
Well,
Or
I would
no?
actually think that they would be
Other
more
way
likely
around.
to sexually cheat
Yes.
or not, but it could go the other. Like I don't know enough about psychology to think maybe that would be. I could imagine if there's a difference on jealousy that could inform the kind of cheating people feel like. It's like
brilliant, yeah, and that's exactly it. Sure. So men are much more likely to have a one-night stand than women. Men are more likely to report that their affair was just for sex. If women have an affair, they're much more likely to say that they're in love with their affair partner. Much more likely than men. I think David Buss cited that in the recent article in the Oxford Handbook of Evolutionary Psychology. Something like 70 or 80% of women said that they were in love with their affair partner, only like 30 or 40% of men. So yeah, when women have affairs, very often there's an emotional connection there. When men have affairs, there can be an emotional connection as well. But it's also often the case that it's just a sex thing.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Well, okay. So one thing that often gets cited is I think it was a study that Ralph Dagan did, where he said that like the tightest correlation with casual sex was being a man, essentially, where basically all other cohorts really didn't associate casual sex as positively as just men generally do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that makes this perhaps really clear why is if we look at the orgasm gap, right? Look at the the
Sure.
percentage of men who orgasm from a one night stand or a casual experience. It's almost 100% of men. For women, first experience, it's something like 12%. Then when you go up to like relationships, it's like 60% of the time women are orgasming in their relationships. So yeah, women,
Jesus, it's that low?
it's still that low, but at least it's not 10% like in a
I
casual
know. I
fling.
mean, I feel like 60%. I mean, well, I guess okay. Well,
2/3. It's still. I think that's bad.
I think it's bad too. But
we gotta get the rate up.
we got
Yeah,
bumped
we really
the
do.
numbers
Or
up.
we gotta get the men's down. I don't know how we're gonna do that one either. But like, we gotta balance it out somehow.
Well, I wonder what correlation is with there and like religion and shame and all of these. There's like so many like variables and like things that could potentially influence that because, like, in my opinion, I feel like there is an aspect of like if you have a lot of shame in regards to sex or like a lot of that, like that might like it's like a mental thing. But I
Yeah.
do
Well,
think that maybe there are some women that have like a physical thing that might affect it too. But like I think that if it's that high, because I don't know what the statistics are and how many women physically struggle to have an orgasm. So I would assume that a lot of it is mental.
yeah.
And
There
we're
are
talking about
definitely-
just across the board, just like in relationships too, right? Not just like
Now,
casual.
I like this point a lot because like I think a lot of people, men in particular, speaking on average, like guys generally want like the most trad woman possible who's a virgin when they get to her and they're married. But I think Brandy, this strongly goes to your point where like if a woman has been told to repress her sexuality
Mhm.
and like view sex as like incredibly immoral for her entire life, then like when you tell her, hey, now the floodgates is open, you could do whatever you want to do. I think there's going to be a little bit of cognitive dissonance within her mind and, a little bit of a struggle to really find her pace and what's most comfortable for her. And obviously, in order for a woman to orgasm, she ideally is comfortable.
Well, yeah, I think there's got to be a level of getting comfortable with your sexuality. Yeah.
Exactly. Well,
struggle.
physically comfortable with somebody
Yeah.
else, and then comfortable having sex with that person as well.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised during one night stands if a lot of it just comes down to men not trying to give the woman an orgasm as well.
Your pleasure is your problem.
Yeah. I mean, I've never really like personally, I just don't like fuck with one night stands. Like it's never really been my vibe. Like I had one because my friends were like, you have to at least try it once. Like you can't just like act like you don't like one night stands. So I did it, but like left immediately. Like I didn't even finish. Like it was like actually the poor guy probably has like got very insecure because I stopped like within like 5 seconds and left and called an Uber. But I think that like for me, I feel like it's not even that I would need the emotional connection. I would need like I guess yeah. There would have to be like not just like but not it doesn't have to be like a romantic emotional connection if that makes sense. Like you just have to feel like you trust the person.
Yeah.
And you don't
Emotional-
trust someone in a one night stand.
Emotional
in my
connections
opinion.
can happen quickly, and
Yeah.
I think I think there's a lot of like factors that go into that kind of like equation for the math where it's like sometimes people who are very like slow to have these like romantic sparks and it takes like many dates to really get that trust have also just been on vacation and met somebody who just made them feel really safe, really sexy.
Safe, I
and
think, is the key here. Like, because
Sure.
we're saying emotional connection, but I think it's about like trust and feeling safe with that person, which would make them feel like comfortable to let loose and like to like be in the moment, right? And which you
Yeah.
can't really do that with someone that you just met like 3 hours ago. Like, I
I
mean, maybe some people can,
I
but I
think-
think it's probably rare.
I think to Alex's point, right? It's like effort is probably
Yeah.
like one of the singularly bigger indicators of it because individually sexuality is so much more complicated. Like what one person wants versus another in a
Mhm.
short, like the way to make somebody have a good time quickly is going to be so like, I don't think that you would see like a nice, neat distribution. You're going to see like, it's really going to be like, oh, let me communicate and find out what it is that you need. I'm willing to put in the effort to kind of like, we'll figure this out together. we can laugh off our miss effects and things like that. Versus like, you know, a guy who's like, I got 3 moves and I'm coming in hard on all 3 of them, and if none of them work, that's your fault. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I did my
think
best.
this is where the trust, being comfortable comes in, because if you're comfortable with the person, then as a woman, you're more comfortable to like be like, move them around. Do you know what I mean? Be like, no, you're doing what I want, actually.
But that goes to
comfort
safety.
level.
You need to make
Yeah.
somebody feel safe to speak, and that they won't be, you know, like rejected for trying to, like, you know, influence how things are going and stuff.
Influence the experience.
Yeah.
One thing that I did want to touch on, because I have had some like red pill people on, and I'm more of neutral. Kyle's more red pill. You consider yourself
Bro,
red pill.
yeah.
Yeah. So what were some of like your critiques that you've had from the red pill?
Sure. So I think when I started getting into it with the red pill was initially approaching relationships and all of that from the perspective of evolutionary psychology, really getting into all of the research in evolutionary psychology. And then, of course, a lot of the red pill stuff is kind of like taking from evolutionary psychology, kind of doing its own pop psychology from that. And so I would see very often small things that would stand out to me, like, no, that's not quite right. I guess, you know, for example, the dual mate hypothesis, right? The idea, you know, kind of that's turned into, you know, like alphas and betas and that sort of thing. So
wait, can you remind, what's the dual mate hypothesis?
Sure. So from evolutionary psychology, it's the dual mate hypothesis, at a longer title as well, the dual mate hypothesis of ovulatory shifts. And the idea is women have a dual mating strategy where they can secure a long-term relationship with someone who will invest and provide. Then infidelity occurs in order to secure the good genes of a sire who, you know, has better genes, essentially. And then, you know, you have kind of cuckoldry along with that, right? You have the good genes. You've been impregnated by this man, and you have this other man kind of taking care of you. He doesn't know that it's a child. And that's kind of what that comes down to. So women essentially have this evolved psychology for dual mating. But most of the research on that, it hasn't replicated well. The rates as well of like cuckoldry or, you know, extra pair paternity, they're really, really low. So most of the evidence at the time is kind of against that. What's much more likely is, you know, all of these different traits that we associate with, you know, being alpha or whatever, good genes, very often, which just comes down to physical attractiveness. Women want that in a long-term or a short-term mate. The same with some of these beta so-called traits, right? You want someone who's stable and who's going to invest and commit and who's a provider. Women want that. Even if you ask about short-term relationships, women still kind of value that for some reason. So these are traits, you know, that are kind of desirable across the board in long-term and short-term mates. They don't cluster together either, right? So there's nothing, you know, that like a physically attractive man is going to be less invested or less of a provider or something. In fact, it's kind of the opposite, right? Married men a little bit more attractive on average, a little bit taller on average. So most of, you know, these kind of alpha traits that you're talking about actually found in the long-term pair bonders rather than the short-term mate strategists, so to speak. So yeah, it doesn't come together well, kind of this whole alpha and beta thing. I think we do kind of see archetypes like that, you know, in our folk psychology, in a sense, right? We see men who are very masculine come across as leaders and alpha, and we see men, we think, a little milquetoast, a little beta. We see these things, right? But as far as like a coherent mating strategy or whatever, doesn't seem to be the case. And yeah, so a lot of the objections I've had with the red pill have come down to specific points in evolutionary psychology. I guess another one that our recent one on Twitter was kind of this sexual market value chart that Rollo made. Has no data. It's plotted as if it were a density chart.
Oh, is this the one where it's like the guy is like older, he has higher sexual market value?
It peaks at like 35, and then
like a girl, she peaks at like 25 or something. And
exactly.
And the guy peaks at like 35, 40 or something.
Right. So I've had a lot of people ask me, like, where's the data from this chart? Where does that come from? And I've had to explain, like, no, he just made that up. It's not based on a data set. It looks, you know, it's drawn as if it were a density plot, but it's not actually real. You know, I think, you know, kind of the idea, you know, that women have an earlier peak is pretty well supported in the research. The idea that men have a late peak at 38, no. So yeah, you know, some things in the red pill are just kind of made up like that. Some are taken from evolutionary psychology, but they get it kind of wrong. Right now, there's a lot of evolutionary psychologists who have very negative opinions about the red pill because you know, if that's your field and you see people getting it a little bit wrong, you just want to be like, that's not right, you know, a little bit autistic about it. And that's kind of what it comes down to.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I do see this. I've kind of just on an anecdotal level have felt that this whole idea that men peak older doesn't ring true and is also kind of bad advice because it's telling men to like oh, don't worry, like you can just when you're you just wait until you're in your late 30s and 40s and that's when you'll have your moment to shine. And it's like I don't think that that's great advice, to be completely honest, because for a lot of people, that's not true. I would say for most people, that's not
Well,
true.
I think for guys to set them up with the expectation that, hey, you're going to peak at 38 without saying like you need to work your ass off till the time you're 30, or actually, you know, to when you're 38 and beyond is the right advice. But like just the idea, like I'm sure some of the guys that you're probably referring to are more the guys that think, oh yeah, but well, fuck it, you know, I'm just I'll peak when I'm 38, right? I don't have to worry about it right now.
Yeah,
No, the
I've
thing
literally
is that
hear guys
yeah,
say this
right,
all the
right.
time.
Well, yeah, you spent the point basically is that hey, for 20 years you worked your ass off and hopefully you've, you know, invested, you know, correctly, you've worked on yourself, you've worked out consistently. Now you are valuable.
But that
by the
doesn't
time
mean that
38.
you're going to get a 25-year-old.
No,
Yeah,
it
no.
doesn't.
Doesn't
It doesn't.
mean that.
Right,
That's
right.
what
No,
I
it
think
doesn't.
that's what they think. They're like, oh, well, my market value is at the
Right.
peak, and the 25-year-olds at the peak.
Yeah.
We're both
Okay,
at our
well-
peaks.
So
So
I'll
real
jump
quick,
in and play
this
devil's
is-
advocate. Go ahead,
yeah.
Kyle. Though I have
Okay,
some.
well, yeah. So, like, with Ryan's work, you know, he brings up covert contracts a lot, which I think is a really, really good concept for people to know. So, like, Brandy, to what you were saying, this is basically a covert contract I set up with themselves. Well, when I'm 38, if I hit these 3x points, you know, I'm making, you know, the 666s that people always talk about: 6 feet tall, 6-pack abs, and 6-figure income.
How do you
If I-
grow?
well,
Leg surgery.
just follow. Yeah, there you go, leg surgery, because there's people doing that now too. But basically, like, it's a covert contract that guys set up in their head. Like, hey, if I meet all these boxes, then I deserve a woman. Well, no, that's once again this mental contract that you have in your head with other people, and you're expecting other people to follow. You know that. You have this own contract in your head that you expect other people to follow, but like nobody is obligated to do that. Like, once again, you should want to do these things for yourself, so that way you are the most attractive person that you can be by the time you're 38.
So, yeah, I agree with you, Kyle, in a different way. But it's
Sure.
to me, the age is not like it's not like people are turning, you know, 35.
Yeah,
and
no. The
becoming
age,
more
the age,
attractive.
in my opinion, is completely irrelevant.
Yeah, like because I'm 38, and my dating
Look
experience
at you, though.
had my dating experience has gotten better almost in a linear, like, you know, I'm not plotting it out, but my dating experience has continually gotten better year after year. But I have also gone through a lot of like growth. Like, I work on myself. I do
Sure.
a lot of self-improvement.
Well,
and
exactly.
to Alex's point earlier, you know,
Yeah.
women are a lot more willing to value other attributes beyond just physical attractiveness. So if there are people who are growing as they age as people, they may continue to stay attractive or even become more attractive as they age. But the people who are looking to get more attractive as they age so that they can then date the 25-year-old are not the people that are growing. They're the people that are like, I don't want to do any more
Yeah.
work. I want this other thing to just happen organically. So it really is. I mean, I think anybody, any dating guru, any sort of like online, you know, advice column that just says like work on yourself and become a better person, you're already doing 90% of what you need to do. And then all the other, like, you know, kind of ideological bullshit you should throw in behind that. Really,
It's branding.
yeah, it's just your flavor.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because there is sort of that paradox there that if a woman's peak value is at 25 and a man's is at 38, then you would expect the two to match up, right?
Mhm.
But they don't. It's really rare that you have such a large age gap, both in revealed
I have a
preferences.
partner who's 25.
There you go.
Right.
Ah, look at that.
Yeah.
No, but
There
Brandon,
you go.
you have like a bunch of partners.
Yeah, I have
who-
partners who are my age. I have a whole So
You're collecting
I-
them. You're collecting them all.
No, I don't. I hate that.
He's
That's
taking them on. He's King Solomon over here with like
Yeah.
a 300 column concubines.
I didn't open my mouth. I'm sorry. But keep going. I didn't mean to cut you off. That was meant to be.
No. So yeah, there's kind of that paradox there that you would expect. You know, if a man's peak is at 38 and a woman's is at 25, you would have a lot of 25-year-olds matching up with 38-year-olds. But people show, especially women, I should say, show a really strong preference for age close to their own. So yeah, they're picking men who are kind of close to that. And then, you know, you might want to ask, like, how is mate value determined? A good way it might be determined is like, what's the value of the other mate that you can get? If that were the case, you know, you would say, yeah, well, the most valuable men are basically the men in their 20s, parallel to the women in their 20s in that sense. But it just kind of depends on how you define it, I guess, at that point.
And isn't that somewhat individual? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's individual for what people value. So like what I valued in a relationship when I was in my early 20s isn't the same thing that I value now in my 30s. You know, like like even the things that I think about, like one big one that comes out to me because I was in a really like abusive relationship is emotional regulation. Like that's not something that I would have really thought about as much, but like now as like being someone in my 30s, I'm like, actually, like this is like a non-negotiable. Like you need to be able to know how to regulate your emotions. Like I don't think when you're young you really know all of those things. So even like when you were like, well, I feel like my dating experience has gotten better, I feel like mine is too, as a girl, which I think people say like, oh no, you're hitting the wall, no one's like like all that stuff, and I was like,
Yeah, I mean, you're attractive and you take care of yourself, though.
Do I? Okay. But
As far as I could tell.
no, but either way, what I mean is like, well, because I thought the wall was a mentality. It's not physical. That's what all the red pill people say. It's not physical. It's a mentality. The wall is inside you.
Many of the women in my community also report their dating experiences getting better as they age.
Yeah.
Again, because of improved communication of partners and improved
Mhm.
sort of like, you know, people knowing what they want so they can be like, hey, here's what I'm
Yeah.
offering.
Well,
And,
I think that also goes to like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like, I think
No,
that just goes like, there's a lot of guys that are necessitous by nature. They don't have a surplus of women waiting for them. So like, even as they're getting older, although they may like to have, you know, as Alex would know, you know, men pretty much from the time they're born till the time they die, identify women right in their mid-20s the most attractive. That doesn't mean that they're
Yeah.
always going to get those women, and they'll generally settle for what they can get.
They'll settle for the 32-year-old. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, but you can also find somebody the most attractive but not want to date them because of their like emotional
Yeah.
maturity
This
level
is
and
the-
things like
yes.
that. There's new again. This is the whole.
There are
podcast, there's
other
nuance.
factors.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when men start to get to their mid 40s, it does shift up a little bit. Then you start to see the men saying, if you ask, like I did in the most recent survey, if you ask what is your ideal age, then they do start to say it's in the 30s, and that's not asking like when do they view them the most attractive, but that is asking, you know, I asked what is your ideal age. So they might be thinking of something else there. They might be thinking, you know, like yeah, I'm 45. I'd prefer to date a woman who's 35, right? And you still have a 10-year age gap. She's still younger, but it's not so incredibly young at that point either. But there's an interesting point that I think you guys all kind of brought up. That's you have to kind of work on yourself over time. So if someone's waiting to 30, imagine someone, you know, they don't date at 18, they go all the way up to their 30s, they never ever date, they never have any relationship experience or anything like that. They're going to be in a really, really hard spot when it comes to dating. They're not going to know how to navigate.
They're going to be
any of that.
stunted.
And another thing that's going to make it really hard. By the time people hit their 30s, the mate pool is small. A lot of the people I call the good relationship havers, they're already paired up. They're already in relationships.
Right.
So maybe the mate pool is not looking as great either at that point. So yeah, I think people really handicap themselves if they're just waiting. And I've seen kind of male self-improvement things just tell men, advise them, like, don't date until you're 30. I think it's really bad advice. I think men need to try to be getting out there, dating when they're 18, young, getting that experience and practice, trying to find someone at the same time, working on self-improvement, like you said, getting that kind of experience so that they know how to have a relationship. That doesn't mean they have to be like really promiscuous or have sex with a bunch of people, but like try to get into a long-term relationship, develop, you know, relationship skills and all of that, you know, whatever. Maybe they do want to be polyamorous. Maybe they want a single relationship, but they need to pick one. They need to do that as opposed to just like isolating themselves, you know?
Yeah.
I have
Well,
seen. I was gonna say I have seen like some people get into like a relationship like that young, and one thing I've noticed is like like the guy gets their heart broken and then they become bitter and like angry, and then they like hate all women and like they kind of go down that spiral, you know. And it's like I think that it's well, no, because
they become incels.
well, and what it comes down to is like, yeah, you just have to. I think that it's good to take time after you get out of a. Personally, I think it's good to take time after you get out of a relationship to take time. A lot of guys don't do this. A lot of guys are like, I'm just gonna fuck a bunch of girls because it makes me feel better. But I think it's like it's good to like take time and be like, I'm gonna, like nurse my wounds, and then when I feel okay, I'm gonna brush off the dust and get back out there. But there is some guys that like get so, if a girl cheats on them, if things like, they get so like wounded, and girls do this too. This isn't just with men, but so I've seen a lot of that, like that kind of becoming like like you get a wound and you can't like recover.
You
Right.
just described working on yourself versus blaming the world.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Yeah. I get that. Well, that's true. Yeah. It's just like, you can't like blame the world. You have to like continue to work on yourself. Correct.
I think that's probably related to a personality trait, and personality traits are very stable across the lifespan. You can work on them and shift them and become better, of course, but some people are much more sensitive to rejection. They have that kind of rejection sensitivity, and some people are also much lower in resilience. And yeah, like you said, if they get rejected, if they get cheated on or something like that, it just wounds them and they never ever get over it. And this can happen even just for teenagers who've been just rejected once. And I think sometimes you do see that with incels, that it's like, if you ask like, what was your bad experience with women or something like that, it was like one rejection, and it has really stuck with them for years, and they frame it and cognitively in their mind like, she hated me, she thought I was disgusting, and things like that. And you can see that perhaps in like some of even the more extreme writings of incels, like the Elliot Rodger Manifesto and stuff. They just frame kind of ambiguous things as like extreme rejection and extreme hostility. So all of those things kind of cluster together there. Interesting, you said, they become incels, but I think what actually happens is a lot of these guys become red pilled. So what happens, we know from kind of past research, and I think also in a lot of the anecdotes, that men enter red pill spaces often because they got cheated on, or they went through a bad breakup, or they were kind of getting rejected a lot. So one of these three things, has made men think like, ooh, I had a really bad relationship experience, I'm not doing well with women, this woman really got me and I want to avoid that. And so then they start looking for help, online or whatever. I got to figure this out. They run into red pill spaces and all of that. So I think that's why you see so much hostility often toward women in these spaces, because they are kind of hanging on to that emotional wound.
Do you have data on individual personality traits as measures of success, or like likeliness of failure in relationships? So are there are there optimal personality traits that make you more likely to be successful in dating, or worse?
Sure. So as far as the big five, extroversion is associated with better kind of dating success, right? Initial meetings and that. I don't think it's quite as clear if it's associated with better long-term relationship outcomes, but conscientiousness and agreeableness are. Neuroticism, high neuroticism, worse relationship outcomes on average. So that's kind of what you have as far as like the big five. If you start looking into like the dark personality traits, dark triad and that sort of thing. Yeah, of course, it's negatively.
Openness has no correlation.
Sorry, what? Openness?
Does openness have any correlation?
I don't actually know off the top of my head. I would think, and here's the thing as well. There are people select assortatively for this personality. And I think assortative selection can either be beneficial or it can be kind of detrimental. For example, if individuals score high in the dark triad, they select assortatively for this. But when you have the two dark triad people, the relationships dissolve much faster. Openness might be something like that, where when you see a match between high openness or low openness, it's better for relationships. I might have read something like that, but I
thought it was the other way around, actually. I think I read that
like a high openness, low openness.
No, I think that too high openness is good, but if a high openness and low openness, it's actually not good.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Is that what you meant?
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
Between the two, that sounds.
Would you have advice for people who are on the maybe not dark triad, but are on have neuroticisms and are introverts or things like how do we help the people that are not statistically, but almost have the deck stacked against them?
Yeah, it's tricky because there's a lot of discussion in psychology, like how do we shift these personality traits? Personality traits, they do shift by themselves over time. There's some indication that therapy interventions can shift them a little bit, but they're considered really stable. So someone who's like really low in extroversion, they're probably never going to become like a really excited extrovert or something like that. I think is basically the best things to do as far as like social interventions go is people need to think about like, what do I want to do, what do I want to be like, and then just start doing that thing a lot. So if it's like I want to be more extroverted, I want to talk to more people, they need to make a list or like set a goal, like I'm going to talk to 3 people this week and keep progressively overloading the people that they're going to talk to, in a sense. Yeah, and that's it. Is just doing the thing that they want to do and becoming better at it.
So it's fascinating because I was thinking that we wouldn't try to change those personality attributes at all. It's like, oh, this is the person. How do we incorporate dating strategy? But it's funny that the first thing you said was actually like, no, just try to be more of those things and it'll be better for
It
you.
is possible though, because
Sure.
I was really high in neuroticism, and now I'm not. Now I'm typical in neuroticism.
What
So
did
it
you
is.
do? What was your journey?
You got older.
I got older. I
No,
grew
No, it
back
goes
up.
way down with age. Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty
Well,
high
I
in
mean, that's also,
neuroticism
like-
in my like teenage to early 20s, and then like now I'm typical neuroticism.
Yeah, but I mean, women are naturally higher in neuroticism, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, probably. But either way, I mean, it's possible to change. I don't know if it's just age. I feel like if I think about it, it's self-awareness. It's being aware of what your actions are doing, and like the outcome of these actions, and like making the change to work on it, and like and also emotional regulation. Like for me, I'm highly anxious, so it was learning how to take that anxiety and not project it, and more so learn how
Express
to
it.
no learn. For me, it's like learning how to just like deal with it, because it's just a feeling that you feel, because I like you're just gonna feel it. Learn how to deal with it instead of like reacting in some way to every emotional reaction. And I think with like what I've noticed with a lot of men, like they might have like anger is probably something that could be correlated to this on like male side, where it's like you have this reaction, right? And instead of like you feel it, but you don't have to like externalize it. Does that make sense? And learning how to not like lash out with that emotion.
I wonder. I wonder if this is a big driver for why there is an appeal for some of these very like kind of like literal dating advice. Like the red pill is like literally or PUA, I guess more specifically, but red pill
Pick
space.
up
Right? Say these words and you will have better success. Like, so for people who are like, I don't know what to do because I'm having less light, and they're maybe even seeing that, right? Like I see all these people who have better or more valuable qualities in the dating market, and I'm not that person. And then they're giving up. It's like, my dream is to find, advice and like wisdom and things like that for the people who are on that bottom end of the scale, who are struggling more, without having to become people like, like not the fake it till you make it kind of thing or something. I mean, I know that works because I've met people who are deeply introverted and have a extroverted mask, and that person's very popular, and then they get a relationship, they're like, I'm gonna go live in the basement now, like let's go out once a month, and that's their dating strategy, and it works. But it's horrifying to me that people have to like bend themselves kind of into a knot to to make that work. And I like to believe that there is some middle ground where it's like, yeah, you might need to be a little more extroverted to just get over that hump. But, there's ways to connect with, there's other people out there who also are struggling with these same things. I believe men and women, those attributes are equal across the dating struggle, right? Like introverted women and introverted men struggle, neurotic men, neurotic women. So how do we, I think a good bit of it is self-improvement if like neuroticism is like objectively like a worse value for dating, but like introverts aren't worse than extroverts as people, right? So like we want to find ways to help them, and I don't want it to be some fucking Silicon Valley app that comes in like, oh, give me thousands of dollars and I'll solve your dating problem.
I would say
buy my brand, buy my group, so you
right.
can
How do we get
you
out of
too
this?
could be happy.
I mean, Alex, I don't know what your opinion would be on this, but I feel like for introverts, it's like almost making like the conscious effort to go out and like do it, just do the thing, like just do it and continue to do it. The thing that sucks is like, say you do that thing where you do the strategy where you're like, I'll just pretend to be extroverted and then I'll go back to be introverted. Then the person's going to be like, who the fuck are you? Like, what the fuck? Like, this isn't the person I started dating. Like, so I don't think that's a good idea either, because that's not going to be good for the relationship if you're showing them this side of yourself to meet them and then you become someone else. But like, I think like it is just like going out there and doing it. And I think about people that I know that are introverted. It's not even that they don't even like being around people. It's that they don't like fake conversation or like small talk. They like, so it's also finding environments. I think this is the hardest part, is environments that are good for introverts. Because I don't think introverts hate always being around people. It just has to be particular environments that aren't like clubs or bars, or you know what I mean? Like,
Oh,
do you,
I love the idea that the dating problems are because we're losing the third space.
Mhm.
Like, what a
Yeah.
great way to tie it all in for me.
I mean, I think that there is an aspect of this that comes down to like we need like well
Let's say safe
actually
spaces.
Third
no,
space,
no,
yeah.
no, 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 no. I was gonna, because this goes into the next thing I wanted to talk to is dating apps and like the dating culture that we have right now, right? So like, it has obviously it's shifted since when I was younger a lot, and I would say that even the environments of just like where do you go to meet people, like where do you go out? How do you meet someone without a dating app right now? Uh, d- uh, Alex, I don't know if you have any opinions on this dating
Yeah,
app
so
stuff.
there's some interesting research that indicates, okay, people have smaller in-person friend groups than they used to. They're attending fewer parties in person. They're also using alcohol less, which is probably a result of not going to bars, or at least kind of with that. And these things alone can account for something like 30% of the variance in sexlessness over the past year. So that's kind of it. Is people are, they're not meeting in person. They're not doing those things. And that does raise a question like, where can people go? I think the places are the same places as like forever. It's going to be places like bars and like hobbies and things like that. School is going to be a big one, but of course that's restricted kind of to that age range when people go to school, and not everyone does that. But yeah, it's tricky because yeah, kind of like you said, there is kind of that loss of third spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that old, but I lived in a small town for a little while, and I remember like I would ask my friends and be like, "Hey, let's get in the car and go cruise the main street," and you would just talk to strangers. You could go to like the burger joint, and like everyone would be like there, and yeah, that sort of a thing doesn't exist anymore. And those were kind of things where it's like if you were introverted, you could pick between being like in the house and doing like literally nothing. Now, if you're introverted, you have social media and things like that. You have video games, so you can kind of chill in the house. But even if you were introverted before, you might be really, really bored. So you might get out anyway just to do something. I guess what you said also, yeah, you don't want to pretend to be super extroverted. Maybe you want to pretend to be extroverted enough to meet an introvert.
Yeah.
Just so you can talk to an
To
introvert a
find
little bit.
another introvert.
Yeah. But people have to be finding hobbies and going out in person and
Mhm.
talking to each other in person and that sort of thing. If they're not doing that and the dating apps aren't working for them, if you're a really attractive introvert, dating apps, great, right? You just put your picture on there and okay, great. I can talk to
Ugh.
people as much as I want. But for other people that's not going to work for, they got to go out in person and do it. And most women are not on dating apps anyway. So
I would say, I mean, I personally hate them and I've never liked them and I never really used them cuz I don't have a great experience. I've had success like twice, and both turned into relationships, and one was a girl and one was a couple. Um, and, and so that was like the only time I've ever like had like good dating app, like met them in person and like had a good experience. And for me, it's because I've said this before on this podcast, but it's like overwhelming. It's like too much, I think.
You
Uh
sound very introverted right now. I'm not saying that in a rude
I'm
way.
actually
yeah.
no. Well, so on like at least I'm like 50-50. I think I'm like 40-60. So I'm actually a little bit more introverted than extro. I mean, I'm a little bit more extroverted than introverted, but I'm like kind of in the middle. So it's very easy for me to become an introvert. um, but I don't like dating apps. Not from like a I prefer to meet people in person though. Like I think that like that experience is better because
Yeah.
I feel like on dating apps you have to like how do you figure out what the person is on this app? Like if you're going to have
It's a
a
buffer.
I know. I just don't. For me, I don't like it, and I could see why a lot of women wouldn't. I could see why women would be less interested in that because
Well,
it's like you're not going to be able to tell. Because I think like it's not men might like it more because it's like oh hot picture swipe, but like I think women there's so many other layers to what they like in a person.
well,
It's
and
not.
you don't know, you can't accurately
Yeah,
assess if that person's going to be like, if you're going to be safe around that person or not. So, I mean, it's kind of understandable that women may not want to use it. So, like, I mean, I had very positive experiences using dating apps. I've probably never said this on this podcast, but like I literally messaged my wife on 2 different ones, and then we actually met in person, and then obviously the rest is history from there 5 years ago. But like they've always been good to me. But I mean, I'm a very, very extroverted, socially, positive person, whereas I can understand for like introverted people, it's probably a lot for you to process to go somewhere that you may not be familiar with, to meet up with somebody that you don't know, to kind of
It's more like
process all
being
that.
stuck with that person if they suck. Like I have
Oh,
to
come on,
sit through
listen. Oh,
dinner
girl,
with
you know
this
what? You know what?
person?
You know what
Like,
girls
come
would do all the
on,
yeah.
no.
Well, that's why you don't have to do a dinner date. But like, you know what girls would do all the time? I've heard of girls doing this. I've seen girls do it. They haven't did it to me, but I've seen them. I've seen them do it to other guys where they literally say like, "Oh, I have an emergency," and then literally they didn't have an emergency. They just did not want to be at the date there. I mean,
I'm
that's
not that rude. I would never do that. If you get me into the building, I'm there. But like that's the problem is like I don't if there isn't a connection then or like anything, like say you go there and you're like, "Oh wow, this was a waste of time and now I have to figure out how to end this politely and not seem
well,
like
that's
a
why.
bitch."
Yeah, you should do a low investment date. Like if you
But-
do
Yeah.
a dinner, then
See, but
that's
both of
a
those
big
things,
commitment.
both of those things are, I think, resultant because we have bad dating etiquette, right? Like
Yeah.
men don't like to be told they're not like the person they're on a date with isn't having a good time. Whereas if you open yourself up to that, like, hey, we're just not like vibing, and that's a positive experience for you, your dating experience becomes magical. Like being able to like put the idea in your head that somebody saying no to you in like a relatively polite way is a
Mm.
positive thing and not a bad thing
Yeah.
is a game changer for dating. If
I
people
have
can like wrap their
rarely
head
seen men take rejection well. I'm not
correct, and that's why I'm saying like it's one of those things where if
Yeah.
you can do it, it really becomes one of those things because like I've seen like I've had this happen for me, but I've also had given this advice to people who actually like internalized it, and you see things like you go on a date and they're like, oh well, this was a really positive experience, we didn't vibe, but I have a friend, right? Versus so like
Ooh.
now you get back to networking where you're, because I feel like dating, like to your point, Alex, when we were intermingling, dating was like, oh, I know somebody. Like you and I are not we're terrible, but this person is, you're kind of weird. Why don't we get you guys together? And when you showcase that you're not like a piece of shit, when someone's like, hey, like I'm sick, and you're like, oh really? Are you sick? Because you were fine 5 minutes ago. It's not a good look. But you're like, hey, like no worries. Like I'd love to say like, if you'd like to do this again, like we can chat more, but if not, like no pressure, like it's all good if we're not vibing. I had a really great time regardless. That is really indicative of like, oh, this person is probably like not a terrible human. And that's really the bar is so low right now because dating etiquette is so terrible. It's really, really easy to lean into that sort of stuff. And I think we need to like we just need to educate people on good dating practices, and then dating will get easier overall because women are so fucking guarded right now.
Is there any studies on men and women being friends? Just wondering, because this is a hot topic on here that men and women can't be friends, or some people's opinions that they can, that if they are friends, it means that they're attracted to each other. Is there anything on this?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, again, in evolutionary psychology, I think David Buss has done some on this, and it's related to what's called backup mates, right? So
Okay.
we tend to select friends who have the features and traits that we would like in a potential mate as well. And so there's some question like, is it a backup mate? We know, for example, that women, if they have a male friend and the male friend gets a girlfriend, sometimes they don't like that, right? Across the research, they say they'll be threatened. So there's actually a lot of research converging lines. I wish I could recall it off the top of my head, but David Buss has a really good review on this backup mates. If you were to look up like David Buss backup mates, a really good review article. All of this different research on it that indicates kind of like, it kind of comes together like, can we really be friends? I don't know, maybe not. We do kind of seem to select friends that might serve as backup mates in that sense. We know, for example, that men will develop crushes, I think, perhaps on their female friends much more easily than the other way around. I think women don't always see that, or women might see that and just be like, I don't want to see that at the same time. And men can hang on to those crushes for a really, really long time without ever saying anything as well, just being in love with a friend for years and never coming out and saying it, perhaps because they're afraid of ruining the friendship. I'm pretty skeptical of the idea that men and women can be friends unless they're just genuinely both of them are not attracted to each other. And I think attraction, yeah.
This
Hold
is
on,
him and
hold
the
on,
red
hold
pill
on, yeah.
agree. Him and Rolo
Yeah,
agree on something.
hold on. So, like, this, I think, also kind of goes to error management theory, which is another theory that I think, I don't know if it was David Buss that invented it, but I've known about it for quite a long time. But basically, like, men always interpret positive interactions with women as sexual interest. Women interpret positive interactions from men as just them being nice. When we all know that I think it was Chris Rock that said it, that anytime a man's being nice to you, all he's doing is offering dick. Now that's not 100% true 100% of the time, but like if a single guy is being nice to a woman, a majority of the time, even not a single woman, but like a lot of the time, generally a guy's being nice because he wants to get laid. Like that is like the general consensus of guys being nice.
Yeah, and another way to interpret it is kind of like, maybe it's not all driven by an ulterior motive, but if you were to let him hit it, he would, right? So he's kind of like,
Yes.
you're attractive, I'll be your
Well,
friend,
yeah.
I can behave.
But guys will
but
fuck
if you were to escalate,
anything.
So
But that's why I, feel like
I do
that's-
really think the sexual abundance is an important thing there,
No,
right? Like,
I actually agree with Nuke here for sure. That I think if like a man has a lot of sexual abundance, then it wouldn't be. But that's not always true because I mean I'm not gonna go anecdotal again, but like I do feel like I have a lot of guy friends that like even in like past relationships and stuff. I've like maintained friendships with his friends, right, from like my past relationships because I'm a gamer and all that stuff, and like they don't have sexual abundance, but like I still have maintained like a real friendship with these people. So I don't know, I guess I don't correlate. But I guess if you're saying that, like, okay, well, a guy wouldn't be are you basically saying that a guy wouldn't be your friend unless they wanted to fuck you? Is this basically what this means?
that wasn't what I was hearing. I was
No?
hearing that there's it's less like there's it's rare to find 100% pure friendship where it's like it could be
Sure,
90% friendship with like a little bit of like, oh, you know, like there's
10%.
yeah.
Well,
So
Okay.
I don't disagree with that because it's one of those things where like, you know, bisexuals can have meaningful friendships, and it's like that's one of those things where they throw that whole idea of like you can't be friends with somebody you're attracted to.
Oh yeah,
out the
because then I'm not allowed to have any friends.
But I mean that's like bisexuality is a little bit different. So like I guess for my situation, like my singer in my band, Jen, is a female, but she's married to the bass player. Her and I are strictly friends, but we would never hang out like one-on-one together. We spend a lot of time together because we're in a band together, and I consider her like my older sister. She's absolutely stunning, and she, you know, that's understood.
I
but,
would
like,
almost push back on that if you would consider her your older sister, but you wouldn't hang out with her one-on-one. Like you would hang out with a sister one-on-one.
yeah, well, for me, this is just like a respect thing. Like,
No,
and
I understand
yeah.
that, but that's one of the you're almost like, and I'm not trying to jump down this, but it's like
No,
if
no, no,
you
that's
put
okay.
artificial limiters on what would allow to be. You have a work friend, right? Like this is somebody you go to the band with, you guys you jam, you love them at work,
Yeah.
but they're a work friend. And if
Mhm.
you know, to me, that is you do that as your relationship style as a sign of respect, love, and generosity to your partner. That you're like, I'm not going to have a deep friendship with somebody in this context, but like, you know, do you feel like you could hang out? You know, like it would be totally.
Oh
fine
yeah,
for you to
absolutely.
do
Yeah,
it.
like we could, but I mean, it's also like generally men and women's interests and like what they do are separate. Now, like I feel like more so today, that's a little less the case. Like, you know, Brandy and I are both gamers, so like we would play video games or something like that together. But like, you know, if I wouldn't ask her, hey, come hang out at my dad's garage so we can work on a car together, right? I would ask all my guy friends to do that, or like, you know, maybe some of the other members of my band. My bass player's a mechanic as well. My drummer is a carpenter, so like, you know, if we're doing stuff like that, then hey, maybe we would build something or do something musically. Like I wouldn't ask my wife if she wants to go fix my car with me. Like that's just not the way that I would do things. Or like Jen, I wouldn't ask Jen, my singer, if she wanted to go fix cars or something like that either.
But wouldn't
So-
you wouldn't like play music with Jen like alone?
No, like we actually have done that before. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean, like generally, there's still like her husband Steve,
Mm.
who once again is a really good friend of mine as well. You know, we would generally all be together because once again we're in the band together, and like I mean, there have been times where like it's just her and I that have played acoustic acts together. But once again, that's in a context like I wouldn't go out to dinner with Jen one-on-one.
So I have I would say friend, but we used to date and but she's a really hot woodworker and has reported struggling with like just trying to freaking jam out in the shop, like, hey, like let's work on a project or something like that,
Yeah.
and has a really hard time bonding over her like really like driven passion of this. Like she's
Mm.
she's a really talented woodworker and has cultivated like a kind of an amazing following because she just like shows videos of her like doing really good work woodworking while being attractive. But she has a hard time connecting with people with like it's like, but just by inviting somebody to do woodworking together, she says men always interpret that as like a like you want to
That goes to error management theory, essentially, where they interpret that as sexual.
I just want to be friends.
It is hard to make new guy friends. I feel like all my guy friends are like old, like they're already established. Like these are like guy friends that I've had for a really long time. You know, like it is. I would say it's hard to make new ones because this is true that like if you're like, yo, you want to go hang out, they're gonna be like, she wants to smash. Like they are,
Right.
unless you have like somehow made that very abundantly clear. I think
even when you have.
I
Alex,
know.
do you have advice for people who are trying to be friends? Like, do you have ideas on how to communicate non-relationship intent? Is there any data on that?
So I don't know about data on that. Well, one thing related to the data in the research, it's very consistent in the research that men overperceive or misperceive sexual interest. So everything that you guys have described, yeah, very true. Yeah, if you're friendly to a guy, there's a good chance he's going to interpret it as romantic or sexual interest.
We got to get our shit together.
So I think one thing kind of related to then like what is some good advice is, you know, if you are in a relationship and you have to make a friend with someone or something, it might be a good idea to be very clear from the beginning and set a boundary and be like this is just platonic, I'm not hitting on you, you know, and something like that. Yeah, I don't know, right off the bat to make it kind of clear, you know, that like this is not flirtatious in a sense, that trying to be respectful to your partner at the moment.
One thing before we end, also female friends act weird when you get in a relationship.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, so I've never all my guy friends have relationships and I'm in a relationship. So like I don't know. I don't know about this, but like I guess I could see this this could happen, but this would only be if the female friend is romantically interested in you. Like
Well,
I feel like
backup.
What
I'm
Nuke
not-
said
I'm
here
not
is
entirely
related to the
sure.
backup mates thing,
Yeah.
right? That we also see in
Yeah.
the research that women feel threatened, when one of their backup mates leaves. And so, you know, I think it's not necessarily that she's going to be in love with you or something like that, but I think this is another thing that happens as well. So I do think there's a big effect of physical attractiveness here as far as it goes, that if someone is, you know, if you're friends with someone, you have a connection with them on a friendship level, emotional or whatever, and they're physically attractive to you, I think you're in pretty dangerous water at that point, because it's almost like, why not fall in love with them? How could you not at that point, you know? And it happens the other way around, I think, yeah, with men and women both, you know, that, you know, if you're an attractive guy and you have female friendships and stuff like that, kind of like what Nuke said there, you will notice, you know, if you get into a relationship that they start acting weird, maybe they'll get mad at you and even stop being your friend, and you realize,
I've
oh,
experienced it.
she liked me all along and I didn't even realize it, you know? I mean, that happens. Yeah.
maybe
The trick is just to fall in love with all your friends and that'd be okay.
Yeah, that's Rin's philosophy. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. We'll have to have you on again sometime.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
really, really fantastic.
No, I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it too.
Could you tell everyone where they can find you?
Sure. So on Twitter at DatePsych, I have the website datepsychology.com and the YouTube channel alex.datepsych. And yeah, that's it.
And Rin, you got any?
So I don't have anything named yet and stuff, but I'm trying to do it's actually probably up your alley, Alex. We're doing kind of like sex positive interviews with people to try to like half data gathering, half kind of entertainment, you know, where it's like, let's get dating experiences from people to almost start teasing out some of that behaviors that's a little bit more nuanced than like, you know, do this, get this. We really are looking for trying to like break it into subcategories as opposed to like, oh, this is what women want. It's like, it's what these kinds of like self-identified, you know, identifiers are looking for. So that's a project that's coming over the next year.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Kyle.
So tomorrow, I'm so stoked. I've been talking about this forever, but my band, A Common Crown, is coming out with their new single, Cry. If you like heavy stuff, check that out. I'm going to be putting a playthrough on my YouTube, so that's going to be on all audio podcatchers. It's going to be I can't wait for everybody here. I'm so freaking excited for this. So make sure you go check that out. In Liberty and Health, usually 2 episodes a week. This Saturday I got Alan Flanagan from Alinea Nutrition coming on to talk about all things nutrition and debunk all the carnivore, keto, and saturated fat zealots. And 5 till midnight on Mondays at 8 p.m. And you can find me at Kalmatovic on Twitter. And that's all I got.
Sweet. All right. So I have another show coming up on I produce burlesque and variety shows, and Rin is going to be Rin's gonna be in it. He's gonna be really in it. And that is gonna be February 16th. So if anyone's in New England, y'all should come. I'll post the tickets on YouTube. It's a great time. I mean on YouTube, not on YouTube. I lied. On Twitter. It's a great time, I promise. And yeah, I think I might do a hot takes. I'm gonna try to do a hot takes in like an hour. I'm at a new place. If anyone's noticed, I'm staying here. I'm staying in a new location for a little bit. So yeah, I think I'll probably be streaming again in an hour. Oh, and next week we have James Sexton on, the divorce lawyer, which will be really fun. New England? Did I say New England? Yeah, I said New England. That's where I live. Why is this confusing? What the fuck? Okay.
You're doing great. We're doing great. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
See you
Bye.
guys.
Good night.